Okay, so I titled this Barley, Loaves, and Fishes because because I was reading, many of Jesus's miracles, um, barley. I mean, the feeding of the 5,000 and feeding of the 4,000. And their feeding of the 5,000 is in all four gospels, and feeding of the 4,000 is in two of them. And there were some commonalities, and there were some unique differences, and I just wanted to wanted to share those with you, and 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 oh man, my screen's acting up. Anyways, so um so there's a lot of information that I have for you, but hopefully we'll get through them, and I could get my main messages across without getting lost in the little details here. But every detail about these miracles that Jesus did is there's a tremendous symbolism behind all of it, and so I'm trying to bring all of those out for you. And these stories are very familiar to us, but I hope to bring some new insights. So you know those stories, so hopefully it's not too boring when we go through them. But nevertheless, we have to go through the details in order to get to the revelation. So just bear with me. So first, before we get into that, I want to kind of remind you of what I taught you guys in the past about biblical Hebrew counting methods. I wanted to go over this because understanding this it'll be helpful to understand what I'm about to share with you about all the different numbers that are included in these two miracles. So what am I talking about? Well, you guys know that each Hebrew alphabet is a number, right? The ancient Hebrews, they didn't have any numerical numbers that we have today, so they used their Hebrew alphabet or their alphabet. Alphabet is a Greek term, but their first letter is Aleph, so we call that alphabet. And they use every single 22 letters in their language as a number. They assign the number. I won't go, well, I'll go through them in a little bit here, but so every Hebrew word, so combination of these alphabets makes a word, right? And it had, so every word has a number which has meaning by itself, and that is called the topic, the field of gematria. So if you combine these numbers that are assigned to every single alphabet, you add them up, and every word has a number, and it has really powerful, significant meanings. Like, for example, again, I shared this in the past, but I'll share it here just to illustrate the example. So the word Jehovah, represented by the Hebrew tetragrammaton letters Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, makes up the number 26 if you add them up. So Yod is a 10th letter of the alphabet, Hey is a 5th letter, Vav is a Vav is a 6th letter, Hey again is a 5th position. So you add it up, it comes out to be 26. And so by the way, the word Jehovah literally means look at my hand, look at my nail. Isn't that incredible? Which shows you he was talking about himself, how he was going to save humanity through the nail being, going through his hand. And so Jehovah literally means look at my hand, look at my nail. And it comes out to be number 26. And ancient Hebrew did not have any vowel sounds, so that's why you have these just the consonants, if you will. And if you look at Mary, Mary is not the original Hebrew word. The Hebrew word for Mary, mother of Jesus, is Miriam. And so the alphabet would be Mem, Resh, Yod, Mem. And if you add those numbers, it comes out to be 290. And Jesus, his Hebrew name is Yeshua or Yeshu, and that if you add those letters up, it comes out to be 316, 316. Isn't that interesting? Like John 3. That's amazing, isn't it? So if you had Jehovah and Miriam, mother of Jesus, 26 plus 290 becomes Yeshua, 316. Isn't that incredible? So you take the God the Father, Jehovah, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, Miriam, and you have the Son of God, Yeshua. Isn't that amazing? So things like this are everywhere in the Bible. So God is, God has kind of coded all of this in the Bible. So if you look hard enough, you find all these links. So but not only that, this next thing that I'm going to share with you, which I also share with you in the past teaching, is what's going to be more applicable for today's lesson. And that is each number can represent multiple variations of the same number. Like, for example, like number 7 can be 17, 70, 700, or 7,000. So it could, so by the way, 17 is the day, 17th of Nisan, the first month, is when Jesus was resurrected. So 7 is a divine number of completion, right? And so he finished his work by being resurrected on the 17th. And he's going to come on the 7,000 year or finish out the human history in 7,000 years. And so there's like so many meanings behind these numbers, these biblical numbers. So for example, another number is 2. Number 2 is Jesus is number 2 because God the Father, God the Son, he's the second part of the Trinity. It could also mean 12, 20, 200, or 2000. And 4 could be 14, 40, 400, 4,000. So you see the pattern there, right? So any number, and I just happened to pick these 3 numbers, but you could take any number and do the same thing. So it could go into the tens and the hundreds and the thousands. So there's each number in the Bible is purposefully placed strategically. God has coded these numbers in the Bible to mean these multiple numbers. And if you understand this, you will see the perfect end time prophetic significance to this. And that's what I'm trying to convey to you guys today, but that's not the only message. So here's the kind of a introduction. I mean, what I'm talking about, the ancient Hebrew. This is not the current modern Hebrew characters, but this is how they started out with, and they read from right to left. These are the alphabets right here, the 22 letters, 22 characters, and you can see how they're assigned each number 1 through 10 here, and then they go through 20, 30, 40, all the way to 90, and then 100, 20, 300, 400. So all the numbers are a combination of these letters. So each Hebrew, so ancient Hebrew is really 3 languages in one. They have the pictogram, the character meaning by itself. Every single pictogram has a idea of that picture. Like, this is why I told you Jehovah means look at my hand, look at my nail, because Vav here is a nail, and here it is. Here's a nail, and Hey here is behold or look. It's a man raising up his hand, like, look at me, you know. And so anyways, so the numeric number we just went over, and then phonetically, you can each letter has like phonics. It makes up the verbal language with these phonetic characters. So so having understood that, keep that in mind as we read through these verses, where it's very familiar to all of us. the feeding of the 5,000 miracle. It's laid out in 4 Gospels, and I listed these chapters here. Luke 9, Matthew 14, Mark 6, and John 6. I highlighted Luke 9 because we'll start off with that. I like Luke. He's a little bit more detail oriented as a physician. So I'm starting out with him here. So I'm just going to read this for you. Verse 10 of chapter 9, Luke. And the apostles. Interesting that Luke calls these disciples apostles. For the first time, they're called the apostles. I always thought that the word apostles were used only in after Jesus was ascended into heaven, and then his disciples became apostles after anointing of the Spirit. But that is not so. They're called apostles even while they were in training, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And the apostles, when they were returned, told him all that they had done. So Jesus sent them out, sends out the 12, 2 by 2, and they perform all these miracles, and they came back, and they're reporting back to him all the healings and the miracles, and he took them and went aside privately into a desert place belonging to the city called Bethsaida. And the people, when they knew it, followed him and received them, spake unto them of the kingdom of God, and healed them that they had need of healing. And when the day began to wear away, then came the 12 and said unto him, Send the multitude away, that they may go into the towns and country round about and lodge and get victuals, for we are here in a desert place. Welcome, Sister Liz. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, so we're going through. We're studying feeding of the 5,000 and feeding of the 4,000, and we're just getting underway. We're reading the passages here. So our continued book of 9, chapter 9, verses 13 and following. But he said unto them, Give ye them to eat. And they said, We have no more but 5 loaves and 2 fishes, except we should go and buy meat for all this people. For there were about 5,000 men. And he said to his disciples, Make them sit down by 50s in a company. And they did so and made them all sit down. Then he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake and gave to the disciples to set before the multitude. Sister Liz, I'm going to have to mute you. There you go. Okay. We will open it up for questions later. Where was I? 5,000. Okay. I'm going to continue on verse 15. And they did so and made them all sit down. Then he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed them, meaning the loaves and the fishes, brake and gave to the disciples to set before the multitude. And they did eat, and all were all filled. And there was taken up of fragments that remained to them 12 baskets. Fragments meaning the loaves, the bread. So I just wanted to kind of share the context or the setting where this was occurring. It says it was in Bethsaida, which is right off the coast of Sea of Galilee here. So in the biblical time, we have Judea, where Jerusalem is, and Samaria in the middle, and Galilee at the top in the north. That's where Nazareth was. There's Cana was here, Capernaum, or the towns around the Sea of Galilee was Bethsaida, Capernaum, Gennesaret. There's more here. Magadan is another town that today's passages were mentioned, and Magdala is another one. Sea of Galilee has many names. And in the Gospels, so one of the Gospels calls it Sea of Tiberias, and there are many different names of Sea of Galilee, and then it refers to different towns that Jesus went around. So they're all in the region of Galilee, and he did a lot of his ministry around the Sea of Galilee, around the surrounding towns. And he jumps into a boat and goes to the other side, it says, and then people just follow him. So that's kind of where it is. And if you see this map on the left, you see the Sea of Galilee at the top, and then the River Jordan goes down south, and it ends at the Dead Sea. And so that's kind of very symbolic too, because Jesus was here, and whatever he did flowed down to save the dead people down here, if you will.
At the Dead Sea?
Yeah, isn't that amazing? So anyways, let's for comparison, book of Matthew and Mark and they're a little similar to Luke, but I won't read the entire synoptic gospel sections, but I decided to read John chapter 6 because he gives a little bit more detail, so more detail than the other gospels, and so I wanted to kind of share that. And he gives a little bit more information. Verse 1, he says, after these things, what are these things? What are these things? Well, you have to go to chapter 5, and you know that he returned from attending one of the feasts of the Jews, it says. It doesn't specify what feast that was, but we'll get into that a little bit too. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. So there it is. John specifically says that they're the same seas. And a great multitude followed him because they saw his miracles, which he did on them that were diseased. And Jesus went up into a mountain. Notice it says mountain, not a desert place like the other gospels. And there he sat with his disciples. And verse 4, and the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh. Now, this verse I've shared with you in the past is a very, very controversial verse, even though it doesn't look controversial. But why is it so controversial? Because everybody's basing Jesus's ministry as being 3.5 years. Based on this verse, because this specifies that he attended 3 Passover. If you count this Passover, it means that he attended 3 Passovers. Thus, he had at least 3 years of ministry. And if this verse is true, then that would be completely logical. But however, as I pointed out in the past, this verse was not there in the original earliest manuscripts. This verse was somehow added later on. And so, so if you don't include this verse, like the earliest manuscripts don't have, then that means he attended 2 Passovers, which fits completely with Daniel chapter 9 prophecy of the Messiah being cut off at 62 weeks of ministry. So he did not have a total length of ministry of 3.5 years. He had total of 70 weeks, where he had 62 weeks unto when he was crucified, and then he has 7 more additional weeks of teaching to the disciples, and where he appeared to, I think, more than like 400, it says in Book of Acts. And then he has essentially ascended into heaven, and then the Pentecost occurring to complete the 70 weeks of his ministry on earth. And so that is very consistent with the prophecy of Daniel. And if you count this verse, that gets thrown off because this verse was added later from my best understanding of scriptures that I've been studying. Okay, I'm going to continue. Verse 5, when Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come upon him, he said unto Philip, when shall we buy bread that these may eat? And this he said to prove him, meaning to test him. Of course, he knew, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth, which is also another word for denarius, of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. Continuing in verse 8, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him, there is a lad here, which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? And Jesus said, make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes as much as they would. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore, they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. And then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth, that prophet that should come into the world. Notice how they said prophet, not the Messiah. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. So what I put together here is a chart that goes over, that compares all these little details, the differences among the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels and Book of John. And so don't worry about these letters or these paragraphs that are already on here. It all makes sense at the end. So we'll go by each box one at a time to examine these details. So on the top, you will see the green. Those are the actual passages, the literal passages. So remember in the last week and in previous teachings, I've told you guys how to study the Bible in the Jewish rabbinical way is to look at the literal, what's on the text itself, the literal level, the ox level, the cow level, where there's not much thinking involved. You just examine the text itself. It's called peshat, and that's represented in the green. And in the orange, it's a little step up from that, where it's represented by the man. The man is the one that thinks, right? So it's called remez. We're thinking. We're thinking, and we're hinting at what the text is saying. And then one level above that is represented by drash, or lion, in the color red. When you go deeper into from the hint, you gather together these insights and revelations, and you can teach it to others and share with others. And then the highest level revelation is Sad, the ego level, where the eagle's eye discerns all these secrets, and God reveals to you more secrets that are encoded in these scriptures. And so this is what we're going to do with every single little thing. Break this down, and then I'll try to attempt to explain this to all of you here. So let's look at the literal sense, okay, the context on these passages. Where is it occurring? It's the context is that the apostles are coming back from preaching the kingdom of God and healing the sick. That's the context. And so Jesus sent out the 12, and then they came back. And instead of them being called disciples, they're called apostles for the first time. How about in Matthew? Well, the Matthew gives it a little different context. It's after John the Baptist was beheaded. So doesn't mention the apostles coming back, but it mentions right before this passage, John the Baptist being beheaded. So you could imagine, John the Baptist is Jesus's cousin, and everybody knows him, and you could imagine all of them being in such a very distraught state of mind as their friend and brother was killed. And so and also what you can gather from this also is that John the Baptist was always 6 months ahead of Jesus. He was born 6 months ahead. He was conceived 6 months ahead. He started his ministry 6 months ahead. And so this also foreshadows Jesus's crucifixion of being about 6 months left of his ministry. And this is very consistent with the 62 weeks or 70-week ministry of Jesus instead of 3.5 years that most people think he had. So he really didn't have much time left after when he was preaching the feeding of the 5,000. He really only had about 6 months left of his ministry. In Book of Mark, he is also mentioning the apostles coming back from preaching and healing the sick, but Mark adds both of them together. He mentions the apostles coming back and the John the Baptist being beheaded, which is a little surprising because Mark is like the shortest chapter. Gospel of Mark just includes a very short information in there, but for him to include both of them makes it even more complete, which is not common in the Gospel of Mark. And in Book of John, of John, he has a complete different twist to it. And it says that this was the context of this happened after a trip, after Jesus took a trip to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. It didn't say feast of the Lord. It doesn't specify what kind of feast it was, and a lot of biblical scholars disagree on which feast it was, and John somehow chose not to reveal this feast. And so for these biblical scholars to say, oh, this was likely Passover, that is completely incorrect. You just making a assumption and making these assumptions, and it throws out these Daniel's prophecy if you make that up. So John chose not to specify which feast, and we shouldn't try to put words into his mouth, right? But John does specify when it's one of the major feasts, one of the 7 major feasts. But there are other feasts in Jewish culture that are not one of the official 7 feasts, like, for example, Hanukkah or Feast of Dedication. It's not included in Book of Leviticus chapter 23, one of the 7 feasts. And there are other feasts like Feast of Purim, which occurs in the spring before Passover. A lot of people think that's the feast that they're talking about. It could be Tabernacles, because I remember I just told you he had like 6 months left. Then it would make sense. It would be one of the fall feasts. So there are a lot of different theories about this, but nobody can say for sure. But all we know is that Jesus went to a feast. This was immediately after. So for John chapter 6 verse 4 to say that a Passover was near, it's really odd, right? He just came from a feast and there's another feast. If he went to a Passover feast, there's another feast. It just completely doesn't make sense, and it supports the fact that I mentioned that John 6:4 was later added. It further supports that, because if there was already a Passover, why would there be another feast, right? So if he just came back from it. And so another thought that I had was maybe perhaps this was a second Passover that I taught you last week. It could be that too, but again, that doesn't match the fact that he probably has 6 months of ministry left. So, but anyways, so what about the word apostle? Apostle means a messenger in Greek. Apostle means messenger who is sent. So why would Jesus or the Gospels mentions disciples as apostles, not as disciples anymore? Because this was kind of like calling them like apostles in training, like a junior apostles, like interns, because this was the first time when Jesus kind of sent them out to, do the thing on their own. So there's a little saying in the medical, as a medical student, I was always taught by attending physicians ahead of me, and we always have a saying: see one, do one, and teach one. So if you want to learn how to perform some medical procedure, you had to see one, and then you got to do that one on your own, and then now you can teach it to others. So it's kind of like that, kind of like Jesus was kind of setting them loose to because he showed them what to do, and so it was time for them to practice it. So he let them loose, and then so that they could eventually teach what Jesus was teaching them as well. So they were kind of like junior apostles, if you will, and like I said, I talked about this John 6:4. It was added later. So what is the setting? The setting here is in Book of Luke. It says it was a desert place at Bethsaida. I showed you on the map that was on the northeastern side of Sea of Galilee. And I suppose if you go a little bit further from that coastline, you will find a desert place. And in Matthew, it also says it's a desert place. And in Mark, he mentions it as a desert place for rest. So because they just came back from this, from healing and preaching the 12, and they heard the bad news about John the Baptist being killed. So they were kind of worn down. So Jesus took them to a desert place to rest, to recuperate. And it's interesting, when we think of a desert place, we think of a desolate place, a dry desert, some negative connotation to that word, but to Jesus, a desert place was a necessary place of solitude to re-energize. And so the application we can take from this is whenever you're going through trials and tribulations, or a desert place, if you will, don't look at it as a desert place. Look at it as a place of refreshment, a place of refreshing, and place of solitude, where you can connect with God, that you can rest with God, instead of a lonely, desolate kind of a situation. Book of John doesn't mention it as a desert place. Interestingly, he says they went up to a mountain. Isn't that interesting? So which is that? Does that mean that it's the other gospels are wrong? And so this is really great to compare, because you have a fuller picture, because each disciples were focusing on emphasizing different things. And so later we read there was a green grass around the area, right? So if you put this all together, the setting is, it was on a mountain with a grassy desert. And I look at this, it's like, wow, they're describing Las Vegas. We got mountains. we got grass and it's a desert, So it doesn't have to it doesn't have to be contradictory that John mentions it as a mountain and other gospels mentions it as a desert place and there's a grass everywhere. Well, this is a better, fuller description of what kind of place this is. It's a mountainous, grassy desert area, just like Las Vegas. And so they were, and like I said, Jesus took them there to seek Sabbath rest away from the city, away from distractions, and away from the noise. And what was the problem? The problem was they were out there quite some time teaching, and it says, I think it was Andrew that said that 200 denarius wouldn't be enough to feed these people, and Jesus was very concerned that they would pass out on their way back home, and he didn't want them to do that. And and then Andrew says, well, we don't have anything to feed them, and that 200 penny worth is not going to be enough. How much was a penny worth? 200 penny worth. That's about a yearly salary of a person at that time. So one denarius, pennyworth is synonymous with a denarius. One denarius is a day's wage. So 200 of that will be about equivalent to a yearly salary for a person. This would not have been enough to feed any of them. So one denarius would have fed 10 persons. So 200 would have only fed 2,000 people, and we know that it wasn't just 5,000 people. They were only counting men, so they had children and ladies there too. So most likely it was about 1,000. About 10,000 people. So this would not have been sufficient at all. So there was a huge problem. They didn't have the resource to feed them. And so Andrew they were focusing on what they didn't have, but what did Jesus do? He points them, he asks them, well, what do you got? And so he helps them to focus on what they already have. So this is what happens to us, right? We always think about, oh, we can't do that because we don't have that. We don't have this, and we don't have that. We don't have the money. We don't have the talent. We don't know how to do that one, But we forget that God has given us the unique gifts and talents that we already have. We tend to ignore what God has already given to us. If we only focus on that, if we're only faithful on those little things, God can do amazing things with us. So we should not focus on the problem or what we don't have, but focus on what God has already given to you. So what was the solution? So they say, oh, we got only 5 loaves and 2 fishes, right? So Luke, Matthew, and Mark describes the same thing: 5 loaves and 2 fishes. But what does John do? John describes a little bit more detail. He says, here's a lad, a little kid, with 5 barley loaves, not just 5 loaves. He describes what kind of loaves it is: barley loaves, and 2 small fishes, not large fishes, but small fishes. So by the way, the word small in the Greek is called apsarion, which it could mean a relish, like not even a fish, like a little relish to go along with the bread. So it wasn't much of a much substance to it, and it could also mean that it was salted and sun dried, and it was a poor man's fish. It wasn't like salmon or tuna. It was more like a sardine or small anchovy type, where you just use it as a little relish. So it wasn't much at all. It was a poor people's food. And similarly, barley is the same thing. The barley was not something that rich people ate. Barley loaves were a very coarse, They were not fine, and it was kind of tough bread. And it was even, I read that they even gave that to their livestock or the animals because it wasn't desirable bread for humans. And so, um, and so, so these were bread and fish. They were very very of for the commoners. They were all commoners' food. And so this is very significant, spiritually speaking, because this is what God wants us to do is to don't take the little things for granted. And if you give it to God, he will bless it and make it so big. And no matter what your gifts are, no matter what you have been given, we give it to God for him to bless it, and he can do miracles with it. And so it's also interesting that a lad was here, indicating a childlike innocence that is required to do miracles. You can't do miraculous things when you are know-it-all. You have to humble yourself. You have to be childlike. Another thing about barley is that uh, barley is interesting because the agricultural cycle of barley harvest in Israel is that they plant that in the late fall or early winter, and then it springs up in the spring. And the first grain harvest is just in time for the Passover time, where the first harvest is given as first feast at the Feast of First Fruits, and it's waved. And this was a representation of Jesus's resurrection. The feast of the first fruit happened on the 17th of the first month, or the month of Nisan, where Jesus resurrected. So this barley harvest represents the first resurrection, which represents Jesus, because Jesus is the one he is our first fruit. Apostle Paul teaches us he is our false fruit. So he is it represents the very first of all the Christians. And of course, also the tithing concept is also indicated here, where first you were supposed to give first tenth, right? The very best to God. And so what about the seating arrangement? In Book of Luke, we just read, they were supposed to sit by 50s. So 50s for 5,000 men, so that'll be more than 100 groups, but we know it's probably 10,000 people, right? So it's probably a lot more than 100 groups, but they were supposed to sit by the 50s. I find it very interesting that God, Jesus directed them to do it by the 50s, because 50, if you recall, is the year of Jubilee, which represents him forgiving debts of humanity. So it's very symbolic. Whatever Jesus does is so symbolic, and you can see it in these numbers that are hidden here. And then in Book of Matthew, he mentions that they were sitting on the grass, and in Book of Mark, it says that they sat by the hundreds and fifties on green grass. Not just regular grass, but green grass. So Mark describes it as green grass, and John describes it as much grass. So whatever this grass was, it was so green, so luscious, very inviting. And this is what Jesus does with us, right? And we read earlier, Psalms 24, he leads us to green pasture. He leads us to a place where we're ready to rest and to feed and to receive from him, place of total peace. And so if you go back to my earlier teaching about the numbers, we know that each number can represent variations of the same number. Like 50 could be 5, 15, 500, or 5,000, right? In this case, it also could be 5,000, which could also be 4,000 plus 1,000, right? 4,000 plus 1,000. So this word 50 or 5,000, it has a hidden meaning of what happens to the Israelites, because at 4,000 year mark of human history, that's when Jesus came. And then the church age begins for 2,000 years. And then after that is 1,000 year of rest of Jewish nation's history. So during the millennial reign of Christ after the tribulation, right? So at that time will be the 7,000 year of human history, where the history of humanity and Israelites will be complete. And so this is all hidden in here. And so here I mentioned already the green grass. It's a fresh, luscious area, a place of safety and peace. And this whole thing represents Israel. Number 5. So what was the method? There were some common things that the Synoptic Gospels mentioned. He took the bread, looked to heaven, blessed the bread and the fish. He broke the bread, gave it to the disciples so that they could give it to the multitude. So that's the pattern here. He took the bread and fish, looked to the heaven, blessed the food. He broke it, gave it to the disciples and the multitude. Book of Mark says the same thing. So little different tenses here. So if you look at this, looking up to heaven, it says in Book of Luke, he looked to heaven. In Matthew, he's looking up to heaven. And in Mark, he looked up to heaven. So you have the present tense and the past tense here. And so he is encompassing all time zones, And so this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do this, past, present, and future, to have faith in always, no matter what time, no matter what season it is, to have faith and to be broken for others, to give and to sacrifice, and take what God has given us and make it something else by giving it to God so he can bless it. In Book of John, he doesn't follow the pattern of the other 3 synoptic gospels. He gives a little bit more description also. And actually, he's not as detailed, but he says he took the loaves, likewise the fishes. So if it wasn't for John, we wouldn't know that Jesus did this with the fish. It gives the impression he only blessed the bread and broke the bread, but the Book of John says also the fishes, okay, and gave thanks. See, in the other passages, it doesn't say that he gave thanks. He said he looked up to heaven and blessed. So while he was looking up to heaven and blessing the food, he gave thanks to God. So see how Book of John kind of makes it all come together even more with a little bit more details. And then he says he distributed to the disciples, to them that sat down. And so the application here is to surrender to Christ, so then he can take you, he can take the loaves, he can take it. He can't take it from you if you don't surrender to Christ, because he's a perfect gentleman, right? And focus on heaven always, no matter what time zone, whether it was in your past, present, or future. Always focus on him, focus on heaven, and be grateful and ask for God's blessing and be broken. That's the key. We got to be broken for God and for others. We are not usable. We cannot be used. We cannot be received by other people when we are so smart, when we want to do our own thing, when we don't submit to God and humble ourselves. We got to be broken. Our will has to be broken so that his will can come through. So you got to be broken, humble yourself, and so that you can sacrifice for others and give. So it's also interesting that Jesus didn't serve the multitude himself. He gave it to the disciples. So this is how he does it. He can do it himself if he wants to, but he chooses not to do it because he chooses us to do it. He chooses us, his people, to reach the masses, to bring others to the family. So he uses his family to add to that family instead of him doing it himself. There'll come a time in great tribulation time, which is imminent. He will do it himself. He's sending his angels to preach the gospel to the rest of the world, he says. But for now, he's using us to do it. And then what about the leftovers? There are 12 baskets of fragments, meaning the bread. The bread is described as the fragments in Book of Luke, Book of Matthew, but in Book of Mark, he includes the fishes. Very interesting detail. So 12 baskets of bread, or the fragment. The fragments refers to the bread and fishes. It's not fragments of fishes, it's fishes. And what's also interesting is this word fishes is plural. So I was wondering, I wasn't born in America, so sometimes I don't know the grammar as well to some people that went through the entire educational system here. But so I looked up how to appropriately use the plural form of fish. And I learned that when you say fishes, it's referring to two different kinds of fishes, like two different types of fishes, two different species of fishes. So if it's just one same fish, one same kind of fish, you wouldn't say fishes. So if you say one fish, if you have like more than two fishes of the same kind, like sardines, but you have 10 of them, you will still call them fish, not fishes, because it's one kind. But if you have sardine and anchovy, those are fishes. So it's interesting that it's plural. Mark includes it as fishes, the plural, meaning two different types of fishes. And I find it very interesting because there are different fishes, different kinds of fishes. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And then Book of John calls this 12 baskets of barley loaves. So he specifies again that these loaves are of barley kind. So what does this mean? What does this mean? 12, what does that number 12, what comes to mind? 12 kinds, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 tribes, the remnant, the 12 tribes of the lost 12 tribes of Israel. And so let's go back to the loaves and the fishes. So, okay, so what are the 5 loaves and 2 fishes? Why 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes? This represents the way in which the multitudes or rest of humanity will be saved. Barley represents Israel, and the fishes, the Christian church. We know that fishes are symbols of Christian church, right? We got that little fish on the back of our cars. And 5 represents 4,000 years of Israel till birth, crucifixion, resurrection, ascension of the Messiah. And then 1,000 years of Yeshua with the Jewish nation after the Great Tribulation, totaling 5,000. So 2 represents, however, the 2,000 years of church age from Yeshua's first coming to the second coming. And so we're right there. We're at the 2,000-year mark since the crucifixion. What about the barley loaves that John talks about here? As I just mentioned, barley represents Israel. So the 12 baskets are the 12 lost tribes of Israel. When he states that nothing be lost, he is emphasizing that there will be no lost tribes. Furthermore, there were no leftover fishes except Mark. They were not present when the barley loaves were collected. This is due to the church already being raptured before the Great Tribulation. There will be no one left behind who believes on the Lord. So in Book of John, the fishes are not mentioned. Why is that? Because the church is gone. The fishes, meaning the Christians, they're gone. And so the leftovers The left behind are only the Israelites. So the true believers are gone. But why does Book of Mark mention the fishes? Well, and that's the only gospel that mentions it. Matthew and Luke doesn't mention the fish. Why is that? It's because Mark is it's said to be meant for the left behind church, which will be consistent with the fishes being left, which represent the left behind Christians. So this fish represents the left behind church after the rapture, the tribulation Christians. And so it kind of gives you a little bit of different insight about the end times when you really ruminate on this, when you let the Lord speak to you. So you know what? We are coming to you know what? I'm gonna go quickly with the feeding of the 4,000. Maybe I'll skip the chapters. Okay, I won't read the passages. So those are found in Mark 8 and Matthew 15. Okay, so I could kind of summarize this a little bit quick for the sake of time. And so in the feeding of the 4,000, instead of 5,000, it's 4,000. Instead of 5 and 2 fishes, it's seven loaves and few small fishes. It doesn't specify how many fish. So it says few small fishes, just a little bit. Okay. So 7 bread, 7 loaves, 4,000, 7 loaves, and few fishes. I'm going to pick up here, Mark chapter 8, verse 15. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. The disciples, so-called junior apostles, were clueless what's happening here. And when Jesus knew it, he said unto them, why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? And he's like saying, are you guys serious? You guys still don't understand what I'm trying to say to you. Having eyes, see ye not, and having ears, hear ye not, and do ye not even remember what I just did with the 5,000? When I break the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? They said unto him, 12. And when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said 7. So instead of 12 baskets, the 7 loaves and the small fishes ended up having 7 leftover bread or loaves, or 7 baskets full of them. He said unto them, how is it that you don't understand? I've been trying to tell you guys. How come you don't understand? What did he mean by that? I mean, like what was there more to understand than the simple, amazing miracle of feeding these incredible amount of people with just a few little bread and fish? Is there something more to understand? Jesus is telling them, don't you understand? This is not just about the miracle. This is just not about feeding the masses. Don't you understand? What was he getting at? What was he getting at? I believe he was getting at this. The numbers here are tied to the leaven of the Pharisees somehow, the leaven of the hypocritical leaders of the Jews and secular governments. So Pharisees represent the religious leaders. Herod represents the secular government that was ruling over them, right? Will be destroyed. These powers will be destroyed after 4,000 and plus 1,000 years is complete for Israel, saving the 12 tribes that were left behind. Similarly, Jesus came at the 4,000th year of human history and will come again to save humanity by 7,000 years. I believe that's what it means. That's what Jesus is trying to say, 4,007, which could mean 17, 700, 7,000, like I told you, right? So here's more. And so I'm going to just skip through. It's a similar passage in book of Matthew. And so This is my slide here that summarizes it, similar to the 5,000 chart. The context here is after 3 days with Jesus. I don't know how many days the 5,000 crowd was with Jesus, but here Matthew and Mark specifies it's after 3 days. It's very important that they mention it, both of them. Why is that? Why is that? Because after 3 days, he gave us the ultimate bread to eat, to forgive our sins, to resurrect us, and to empower us. This is all a symbolism of his death and resurrection after 3 days. So I won't get into the wilderness. We talked about it already with the desert. The 7 loaves and few small fishes, few little fishes, 7 loaves. What does this mean? It means it came at 4,000 years and will finish by 7,000 years. And I find it also interesting that the numbers of the fishes are not specified here. Why is that? Why is it? Just a little bit, handful left. I believe the feeding of the 4,000, unlike the 5,000, is solely based on the fact that this was meant for the Jews, the Israelites, because in 5,000, they include the Christian church with the 2 fishes. But here, it's not specified. It's not the two fishes. It's just few little fishes. And those are, I believe, the left behind Christians. And so there are some fishes around, but that's not the church that's going to be raptured. And the method is the same. He took the loaves, gave thanks, broke the bread, and gave it to the disciples to give it to the masses. And there were 7 baskets of broken meat, it says. So what does that mean? Well, it's the same thing, right? 7 means divine completion, perfection, accomplished through the resurrection on the 17th of the when he was resurrected on the 17th of the first month by 7,000. So I said a lot of things there. What are the take-home messages here? Don't kick the can down the road. Don't abdicate your responsibility to help others to somebody else. You give them something to eat. Jesus was telling them, I don't care what you don't have. You give them something to eat. And focus on what you already have, what God already gave you, instead of what you don't have. Be broken for others as Christ was broken for you. Believe God will bless and multiply your work to bless others. God has different plans for Israel and the church. He will not leave his people behind. That's what the leftover baskets were all about. He will not leave them behind. He will collect all of them. And he has a different plan for the church, which is about to be raptured, and Israel, which will come to accept the Messiah through the tribulation at the end of the tribulation, and they will be with him for 1,000 years, as we will be also returning from with Jesus at the great tribulation mark.